Hey, real quick before the story starts, if you like lit reading, I've got something new you might enjoy. It's called New Tales Told, original short stories. Same voice, same vibe. Just search for New Tales Told right here in this podcast app. And just so you're not surprised, there may be some ads before the story. Sorry, we have to pay the bills.
Few things are as uplifting as the greatest moments in sports. And nothing brings us together quite like Team USA at the Olympic Winter Games. From NBC Universal's iconic storytelling to the innovative technology across Xfinity and Peacock, Comcast brings the Olympic Games home to America, sharing every moment with millions. When Team USA steps onto the world stage, we're not just watching, we're cheering together. This winter, we're all on the same team. Comcast, proud partner of Team USA.
Hi, I'm Don McDonald. Stillworth Crossing is the kind of place people would like to believe still exists. Quiet, orderly, sensible. Nothing dramatic ever happens there. And when something does, there's always a process for handling it. A process that's been refined over many years. Carefully, thoughtfully, thoroughly. This is a story about how that process works and doesn't. This is The Committee Committee by me. Mr. Phelps slid his key into the lock of his shop at 7:15 as he had done for 31 years. Across the square, Eleanor Fitch walked her terrier past the war memorial, nodding to no one in particular and everyone in general. Life was good in the small village of Stillworth Crossing. These were ordinary people doing ordinary things. They did not think of themselves as remarkable, and they were not. But they lived alongside one another with a degree of care that is, perhaps, rarer than it should be. And if you asked any of them what made it work, what kept the village running smoothly across the decades, they would mention the council. The Stillworth Crossing Village Council had governed for as long as anyone could remember. 5 members, elected every 4 years, entrusted with the ordinary business of keeping a small place running. Roads, budgets, permits, disputes. In the early days, the council did this work itself. Meetings were long. Debates were longer. Every pothole was discussed. Every streetlight considered. Every complaint heard in full. This was democracy, and it was exhausting. And so, reasonably enough, the council began to delegate. A finance committee was formed to review expenditures. An infrastructure committee was created to assess repairs. A parks committee, a planning committee, an events committee, each one sensible, each one efficient, each one allowing the council to focus on matters of real importance. The committees worked. For years they worked well. Residents with expertise could contribute without running for office. Recommendations were thoughtful. The council reviewed, approved, and moved on. And then, gradually, something shifted. When a question arose, it was referred to the appropriate committee. When a concern was raised, a subcommittee was formed. When committees disagreed, a joint committee was created to reconcile their views. The council still met, but there was less to decide because decisions had been delegated. There was less to debate because debates happened elsewhere. Years passed. Council members came and went. The committees remained. No one could say exactly how many committees still existed in Stillworth Crossing. The number depended on how one counted, and no one had counted in some time. There were standing committees and ad hoc committees, subcommittees, and advisory panels. Some met monthly. Some met only when necessary, which increasingly meant never. A few had outlived their original purpose, but remained in the village directory because disbanding a committee required a motion, and a motion required a rationale, and a rationale invited questions. It was not until the election of Catherine Daly that anyone thought to ask whether the system still made sense. Mrs. Daly was not a radical. She had lived in Stillworth Crossing for 9 years, which made her a newcomer, and she had run for council because she believed in participation. But she had a habit of asking how long things had been the way they were and why. The traffic signal, for instance. It stood at the corner of Main and Hillcroft, a mechanical relic from 1932 with painted steel arms that swung out to signal stop and go. It was, everyone agreed, charming. It was also broken more often than it worked, and replacement parts had not been manufactured since 1957. "Could we not simply replace it?" Mrs. Daly asked at a council meeting early in her first term. The question was received with patience. It was explained that the signal had been designated a historic structure. Any modification required consultation with the Historic Preservation Committee. The committee had been consulted some years ago and had raised concerns. The matter was under consideration. "I see," Mrs. Daly said. "And the council's role?" There was a pause. "We await the committee's recommendation," she was told. Mrs. Daly did not argue, but she began to pay attention. Over the following months, Mrs. Daly noticed something that no one else seemed to notice, or perhaps that everyone noticed and no one discussed. The council had become a rubber stamp. Committees recommended, the council approved. Committees deferred, the council waited. The actual decisions, such as they were, happened somewhere in the maze of subcommittees and advisory panels that had accumulated over the decades. The traffic signal, meanwhile, remained broken. It was Mrs. Daly at a council meeting in her second year who raised the question that would change everything, though not in the way she intended. "I wonder," she said, "whether we might benefit from some clarity regarding our committees, their number, their mandates, their current status, and whether this council has perhaps ceded more authority than we intended." The room was quiet. Concerns were raised, not objections precisely, but concerns. It was noted that committees served important functions. It was observed that any review must be conducted sensitively. And then Alderman Briggs, who had served longer than anyone and who rarely spoke, offered what seemed like a reasonable solution. "Perhaps," he said, "we should form a committee." Mrs. Daly opened her mouth and then closed it. "A committee," Alderman Briggs continued, "to provide guidance on the formation and continuation of committees, to ensure consistency, to offer oversight." The proposal was discussed. It was found to be sensible. It addressed Mrs. Daly's concerns through proper channels. A motion was made. The motion carried. The body was formally named the Committee Review and Oversight Committee. A few referred to it as the Croc. The moniker that stuck was the Committee Committee. The Committee held its first meeting on a Tuesday evening in the small conference room at the back of the village hall. 6 members had been appointed, each chosen for their experience and their temperament. There was Harold Barrow, who was quite old and quite hard of hearing, though he refused to wear the aids his daughter had bought him because he said they made him look elderly. He spoke loudly and with confidence, and if his remarks occasionally drifted from the topic at hand, they were always received with respect and recorded by the secretary into something like coherence. There was Frances Oakley, who had chaired the Finance Committee for 11 years and who believed that proper procedure was the foundation of proper governance. She had a gift for summarizing confusion into consensus. There was David Monk, recently retired from a career in municipal planning, who brought binders to every meeting and frequently referenced precedents that no one else remembered. There was Susan Hale, the youngest member, who had joined out of a genuine civic interest and who asked careful procedural questions that were always acknowledged and rarely answered. There was Duane Hadley, who seldom spoke but attended every meeting without fail. And there was the secretary, Gerald Finch, who kept the minutes. Gerald Finch recorded what was said, or rather, he recorded what had been meant, which was not always the same thing. The minutes in Gerald's hands were not a record of what happened. They were a translation of disorder into order, of confusion into process. The matter before the committee was the Drainage Study Group, which had not met in 3 years. "The question," said Frances Oakley, is whether the group remains necessary given that drainage increased by more than twofold." Harold Barrow leaned forward. "Dwayne too old? Of course he's not too old. Who said Dwayne was too old?" Dwayne Hadley, seated at the far end of the table, shifted uncomfortably. "Drainage, Harold," said Francis, slightly louder. "Drainage increased twofold." "He looks to be in his 50s, Harold continued. "But who cares how old he is? A man's age shouldn't disqualify him from service. I'm 81 and I'm still here." "Yes, you are," said Francis. "Thank you, Harold," said Dwayne. "You're welcome, Dwayne. I always thought you did fine work." Gerald Finch paused, then wrote. Mr. Barrow expressed support for Mr. Hadley and affirmed the value of experienced committee membership. "The drainage issue," said David Monk, flipping through his binder, "was resolved provisionally. The 2007 report recommended the increase but noted that conditions may change." "That was 17 years ago," said Susan Hale. 17 years of adequate drainage. That doesn't mean 18. "Perhaps," said Francis, "we might reclassify the group as inactive rather than dissolve it entirely. That way, should conditions change, the mandate remains in place." "A prudent compromise," said David Monk. "I'm sorry," said Susan Hale, "but if it's inactive, what's the difference between that and—" "The difference," said Francis, "is that dissolution is permanent. Inactivity is reversible. We preserve optionality." Susan Hale nodded slowly. She had learned that nodding was easier than asking the next question. Gerald Finch wrote, "After thorough discussion, the committee agreed to reclassify the Drainage Study Group as inactive but extant, preserving its mandate for potential future activation." "Shall we move on?" said Francis. "Next is the Bicentennial Planning Committee." "Lovely event," said Harold Barrow. "I remember the parade. Eleanor Fitch's mother carried a banner." "That was 35 years ago, Harold." 35 years, Harold said, shaking his head. "Doesn't seem it." Gerald Finch wrote, Mr. Barrow reflected on the enduring legacy of the village's bicentennial celebration. The Historic Preservation Committee's objection to replacing the traffic signal had been formally submitted and now required the committee's review. David Monk read the objection aloud. It was 4 pages, single-spaced, and referenced the village charter, 3 state statutes, and a 1987 letter from a professor of architectural history who had since passed away. "Thorough," said Francis Oakley when he had finished. "The professor made some excellent points," said David Monk. "The professor is dead," said Susan Hale. "His points remain valid." "The signal doesn't work," Susan said. "It hasn't worked properly in years. Someone is going to get hurt." "That's an infrastructure matter," said Francis. "We're reviewing the preservation question." "But surely—" "One thing at a time, Susan. Process exists for a reason." Harold Barrow cleared his throat. "I've always liked that signal. My father used to say it was the only honest politician in town." He chuckled. "Stop and go. No maybes." There was a pause. "Thank you, Harold," said Francis. Gerald Finch wrote, Mr. Barrow noted the signal's historical significance to multiple generations of residents. "Perhaps," said David Monk, "we might recommend that the Infrastructure Committee consult further with Historic Preservation before any final decision is made." "They've been consulting for 6 years," said Susan. "Then they should be close to a resolution." Francis Oakley nodded. "I think we can recommend continued consultation with a progress report due to the Council by next fiscal year." "Which begins in July," said Susan. "Which gives everyone adequate time." Susan Hale said nothing. Gerald Finch wrote, The committee recommended ongoing interdepartmental consultation, with a progress report to be submitted in the following fiscal year. Members expressed confidence in the collaborative process. The committee met monthly. It reviewed existing committees. It drafted criteria for evaluation. It proposed frameworks for periodic review. No committees were disbanded. They were reclassified. They were consolidated in theory. They were scheduled for future evaluation. They were, in the language of the minutes, addressed. The council received these reports and expressed appreciation for the committee's thoroughness. Years passed. Harold Barrow passed away and was memorialized at a council meeting as a dedicated public servant. Frances Oakley retired to be closer to her grandchildren. New members joined, attended meetings, and eventually understood that the committee's purpose was not to reduce committees but to demonstrate that committees were being considered. The traffic signal was replaced in 2019 after the last mechanic who could repair it died and the insurance company refused to continue coverage. The Historic Preservation Committee noted its objection in writing. A plaque was installed commemorating the original signal. Everyone agreed this was a reasonable compromise. Mrs. Daly served 2 more terms on the council and then declined to run again. It was Susan Hale, in her 9th year on the committee who finally asked the question. She had not planned to. It arrived the way most things did in Stillworth Crossing, without urgency, during a pause, almost as an afterthought. "I wonder," she said, and then stopped. She looked down at her papers. "Forgive me. I wonder whether we have ever considered reviewing ourselves." The room was quiet. "That is," she continued, "whether the committee itself should be subject to the same evaluation we apply to other committees, whether our mandate remains clear, whether our function is," she paused, "effective." It was, everyone agreed, an important question, a sensitive matter, not something to be rushed. A task force was appointed to study the question properly and make recommendations. The task force would report its findings to the committee. No deadline was set. Susan Hale nodded. She had expected nothing else. I hope you enjoyed this original story. If you did, please leave a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or a 5-star rating on Spotify. Check out our multiple collections of short stories at shortstoryverses.com. That's shortstoryverses.com or on the Short Story Verses channel on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for being here. I'm Don McDonald. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. You're officially a story finisher, and I appreciate that more than you know. If you're curious what else I'm up to, check out one of my other podcasts, New Tales Told. It's brand new, original short fiction written and narrated by me. Just search New Tales Told in this app. And thanks so much for listening to Lit Reading, now part of the Short Story Verses channel at shortstoryverses.com.